He wasn't supposed to beat him. That was the narrative at the start of 2025. Max Verstappen was the final boss of modern Formula One, the man who had turned winning into a weekly habit, who'd made entire seasons feel like a formality. Lando Norris? He was the kid everyone liked, the Twitch star who grew up. Fast, funny, brutally talented, but, for years, always the nearly mad. By Abu Dhabi 2025, that story was dead, because somehow, in a season that looked nailed down before it even began, Lando Norris walked into the final race with the most precious thing in F1 in his hands, a title lead over Max Verstappen. This is how he stole it. Not with one miracle race, not with one controversial crash, but with a season-long ambush built out of upgrades, discipline, and a version of Lando we had never seen before. To understand how big this was, you have to rewind to preseason. Winter 2025 looked familiar on paper. Red Bull still carried the aura of a team that had solved the current regulations better than anyone. Verstappen still had 3 world titles that could easily have been 4 or 5. Most predictions went like this: Max first, daylight second. McLaren was respected, but not feared. Yes, 2024 had been the year Norris finally won his first race and McLaren dragged itself from the midfield towards the sharp end. But a lot of people thought they'd hit their ceiling. Good enough to win on the right day. Not consistent enough to rip a championship away from a Verstappen-Red Bull combo that had made domination look routine. Inside McLaren, though, the mood was very different. They knew the car they brought to the last races of 2024 was more than just promising. It was a platform. The data said they weren't that far away on outright pace. What they were missing was 2 things: better low-speed consistency and a driver who believed, deep down, that he wasn't just allowed to race Max. He was allowed to beat him. The first problem was solved in the wind tunnel. The second, on Lando's side of the garage. The opening Flyaways of 2025 didn't look like a robbery. Red Bull started strong. Verstappen still had that familiar blend of raw one-lap speed and terrifying race day control. He took poles. He converted them. On Sundays, he managed tires like a surgeon, never over-pushing, always leaving something in hand. But the gap was different this time. Instead of half a second of orange blur in qualifying, it was a 10th, sometimes less. On tracks where McLaren had historically struggled, they were suddenly in the conversation. Lando was no longer hoping to inherit podiums. He was fighting for them on pace. The first crack appeared on a Sunday everyone expected to be routine. A safety car at exactly the wrong time for Verstappen. A slow stop that cost him track position. And behind him, a papaya-colored car that refused to stay back. Norris didn't dive for a desperation move. He did something more dangerous. He applied pressure, lap after lap, never out of control, never fully backing off. The kind of pressure where even a driver like Max can no longer manage the race exactly how he wants. When the opportunity finally appeared, a slightly offline entry, a hint of wheel spin on corner exit, Lando took it with the kind of certainty that used to belong only to Verstappen. He won. On paper, it was just one victory. On the timing screens, it was just one Sunday where Red Bull got it wrong. But psychologically, it was the turning point. Because in that moment, all the old labels started to peel off. Suddenly, Lando wasn't the driver who'd find a way to lose one day. He was the guy who'd just gone wheel-to-wheel with the most ruthless closer in the sport and come out ahead. The middle of the season is where the theft quietly became a plan. McLaren's upgrade path was relentless. Not flashy, not headline-grabbing, just effective. Every few races, the car picked up a hint more downforce in medium-speed corners, a little less drag on the straights. The kind of gains that don't show up in highlight reels, but show up every Saturday when the timing tower flickers green next to your name. Red Bull, by contrast, hit turbulence. Not collapse, not disaster. Just the kind of 1% slip that matters when the field has finally caught up. A floor update that didn't unlock what the simulations promised. A setup direction that made the rear twitchy on bumpy street circuits. A couple of reliability gremlins that cost Verstappen track time on Fridays. Under the old rules of F1, they might have gotten away with it, but not against this version of Norris. Lando 2025 stopped racing like a man desperate for a win and started racing like a man building a points tower. He didn't chase every marginal move like it was the last lap of his career. He didn't panic when Verstappen beat him to turn 1. Instead, he played a long game most people didn't realize he had. If the car was second fastest that weekend, he took second. If the tires looked fragile, he accepted pacing himself for 30 laps while everyone else ran too hot too early. If the team called for an undercut, he hit every outlap marker with cold-blooded precision. The old Lando would sometimes overthink. The new one was ruthless. And slowly, quietly, the standings changed. Not through shock results, not through chaos, through an avalanche of podiums. Of course, a title fight this big never happens without drama. There were flashpoints, a brush of wheels at high speed that left both cars fuming on the radio. A qualifying session decided by less than 1/100th of a second, where Verstappen's lap was good and Norris's was just better. A strategic duel in changeable conditions where McLaren kept Norris out one lap longer on slicks, gambling on a drying track, and Red Bull blinked first. On days like that, you could feel the old balance of power shifting. For years, Verstappen had been the one who could bend a race to his will, forcing others into his orbit. In 2025, for the first time, he found someone who could bend it back. The key difference wasn't raw talent. Max didn't suddenly forget how to drive. It wasn't courage. Both men were prepared to send it into a braking zone that looked impossible. The difference was margin. Lando had a car that gave him enough of it, enough rear grip in qualifying, enough tire life in the last 10 laps, to actually use everything he had without crossing the line. Red Bull still built a brilliant machine, but it was no longer bulletproof. To win now, Verstappen had to live closer to the edge. And when you're there all the time, the cost of a tiny misstep goes up. So when the first real mistake came, a lockup, a trip through the runoff, a race where Max turned a sure podium into damage limitation, the championship graph shifted again. Norris didn't capitalize with something spectacular. He capitalized with something worse. Another clean, near-perfect drive. By the time the season reached its final stretch, Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, the whole tone of the conversation had changed. The question was no longer, could Lando Norris one day become a world champion? It was, could Max Verstappen stop him from becoming one right now? Circuits where Red Bull were expected to dominate became knife fights instead. Vegas, a street circuit with insane speeds and cold night temperatures, turned into a case study in pressure. Norris managed his tires, picked his moments, and refused to be baited into a late race mistake. Verstappen chased, attacked, tried to force something to happen, and ended up second. On the cool-down lap, the radio messages said everything. McLaren sounded like a team that had just confirmed the inevitable. Red Bull sounded like a team realizing the inevitable might not include them this time. Heading into the final round, the maths was brutal. Norris didn't need to win. He just needed to survive. Verstappen, on the other hand, needed perfection and help. An error from McLaren, a safety car at the right moment, a bad start from Lando, something, anything. And that's how we arrive at the image that will live on every highlight reel from 2025. The final laps under the Abu Dhabi lights. Two cars, two eras, two very different seasons converging on the same strip of tarmac. Verstappen, out front on the road after an aggressive strategy play, early stop, track position, nothing left on the table. Norris, behind, on slightly fresher tires, with a choice that would define how people remembered him. He could attack, risk everything, go for the win, the statement, the "I beat Max on track for the title" moment. Or he could play the percentages, hold back just enough to stay safe, bring the car home. For most of his career, Lando Norris had been the guy who went for the move. In that moment, he became something else. He became a champion. He read the numbers, listened to the pit wall, felt the car under him, and understood what it was really telling him. The title was his as long as he didn't try to prove anything extra. So he did the hardest thing a racing driver can do with a faster car. He didn't send it. He sat in Verstappen's dirty air, managed the gap, protected his tires, picked off back markers with surgical caution. Every lap, he had the opportunity to throw it away in the name of glory. Every lap, he chose not to. When the checkered flag finally fell, Verstappen crossed the line first. But the world title didn't go to the guy who won that race. It went to the guy who'd won the season, Lando Norris. In the aftermath, it was tempting to call it an upset. The kid beats the king. The streamer dethrones the serial champion. But if you look closely at 2025, it wasn't a theft carried out in one night. It was a slow, methodical robbery of all the little advantages Red Bull and Verstappen had built over years. Aerodynamic supremacy? McLaren caught up. Strategic confidence? McLaren matched it. Mental edge? Lando quietly took it for himself, not by shouting on the radio or playing mind games in interviews, but by doing the same simple, brutal thing every great champion eventually learns to do. Show up, deliver, again and again and again, until the idea of you not winning starts to feel stranger than the idea of you beating a legend. That's how Lando Norris stole the 2025 title from Max Verstappen, not with dirty tricks, but by becoming the one thing nobody ever thought he'd be when he was just the smiling, fast kid on the back of the grid. Inevitable.